So I want to welcome all of you to the PCC Forum, Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness Forum. It's a transdisciplinary lecture series hosted by the California Institute of Integral Studies as a student group that stems from this larger program. So tonight we are very fortunate to have Linda. Welcome, Linda. Linda recently completed a PhD in analytical philosophy at UC Santa Cruz. Her dissertation, entitled Frontiers of Plant-Human Collaboration, aims to make sense of novel practices of collaborating with plants by reworking underlying assumptions about the nature of reality. Prior to completing the PhD, Linda received an MA in Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness from the California Institute of Integral Studies. After having completed certificate programs in both permaculture design and sustainable development. As part of her initial training and career, Linda received a BS in mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley and spent a decade working in biotechnology. Linda lives in Sebastopol with her husband, kids, dog, and all the other beings with whom she is privileged to be sharing the land. So thank you, Linda, for joining us tonight, and take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt, both for the introduction and for inviting me here to give this talk. I'm also grateful to the PCC program and the whole PCC Forum organization. And thanks to all of you for coming and for anyone who's listening to the recording. I myself have enjoyed listening to quite a few of the recordings of the past PCC forums. I'm currently zooming in from Sebastopol, which is in about a little bit north of San Francisco in California. And I'm here on a beautiful piece of land with all sorts of different trees and plants and critters. There's owls and frogs and fox and skunk. And I just want to invite in the presence of this land and all of the beings into this talk as well. And since we're all coming from different places, I think someone's even here from Canada tonight, I would love to also invite in all the places and beings where all of you are coming in from. So I would be in person with all of you, but it's wonderful that we have this technology. Now, what I plan to do is start with a little bit of an overview of the presentation that I'm going to give you, and then I'd like us to do a meditation together to just bring all our energies into the space together. So let's see, the main focus that I want to get into for this presentation is to share with you the work that I'm currently doing here on this land with other than human beings. When you think of other than human beings, you might start by thinking about animals, for example, and there are many humans who work with animals and who communicate with animals. But it's also not uncommon to think of plants as beings, or mountains, or bodies of water. And sometimes people will associate a spirit with such places or beings, like the spirit of a tree or the spirit of a river, for example. And in these cases, I take a spirit to be some kind of disembodied or disincarnate being that is associated with this physical form. And perhaps there can also be spirits or other than human beings who are not associated with physical forms. For me, all of this and more is included in what I mean by other than human beings, though mostly I've been dealing with ones associated with the land and the plants here. So I'd like to situate just this work within the PCC program as well. And I'm going to share my screen and have just a few slides now and then to help things along. So some of you may know or may remember the PCC mission, which I've really enjoyed keeping as one of my focal points. Part of this mission, at least, is to reimagine the human species as a mutually enhancing member of the Earth community. So important, right? And I like to think in terms of the cosmic community, not to draw a big line or difference between the Earth and the cosmic communities, but just to make sure we're not excluding any kind of beings that might not be considered earthly, for example. And also, I'm not here tonight, at least, to present some kind of an overarching framework for the human species and its evolution. I'm more interested right now in sharing with you my personal journey of reimagining self as this mutually enhancing member because that to me right now is an active pursuit and something engaging that I can tell you about. So I'll be saying something about how I've grappled with finding wholeness and meaning in a materialistic society. And I'm going to share with you 2 guiding questions that have come with me along the way that I'll go into a bit more as we go along. The first one is about our underlying unconscious assumptions that frame the way that we act and frame the way that our society is formed. I think this may be a common question for people who are in the PCC program, exploring what these are and how we can overcome them. Well, my way of overcoming them had to do with figuring out frameworks having to do with wholeness and interconnectedness. But the guiding question that I've come to with that is not so much anymore how to navigate these concepts analytically, but how to really live them, how to actively recognize and act from this place of wholeness and interconnectedness. And that, I think, is what I'm doing here, working with the beings on the land. Now, I would like to continue with a meditation, just to get us all into the same space together and start to feel some of the things that maybe I tried to go into before I'm going to connect with other beings. So we'll be feeling into our bodies and feeling into the spaces around us. And if you're not used to meditating, there's no right way to do it. You just stay aware as you can and be with whatever comes up. And if you're experienced with meditating, I'm going to go fairly quickly through these different felt stages of our body and the space around us. So there won't be too much time to settle into each stage, just as a warning. So if everyone's ready and can get comfortable, let's begin our meditation. Let's let all the events of the day and any busy thoughts fall away and draw your attention inwards. Take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes if possible. Direct your attention to your feet. Notice where they are in space. You might be visualizing your feet in space, creating an image of your feet in your mind's eye. That's fine. But if you can, try to connect with a felt sense of your feet. Directly feel your feet where they are in space. Are they cold, warm, tingly, tight, soft? Notice anything that comes up. And now release the tension from your feet, making sure to breathe. We'll continue this process with a few other parts of our bodies. Moving up your legs, connect to the felt sense of your knees and release your knees. Sense where your hips and pelvis are and release any tension. Breathe into your belly and release the center of your body. Breathe into your heart and release any tension in your chest and back. Now let your breath reach all the way up into your head. Release any tension in your face and neck. Feel and release your brain. Now sense where your shoulders are in space. And release your shoulders. Down through your elbows into your hands. Release the tension in your arms. Feel and release each finger. And feel the tip of each finger and how it touches the space around you. Now feel your body as a whole, sensing the space around you through your body's felt sense. Feel the things that are located in space around you. Perhaps a chair or couch, a desk or table, some plants, pets, other people. Feel the floor, the ceiling, the door, the windows. Imagine a flow of energy connecting you to all these things, like a spider spinning its threads to connect these points. See if you can use your felt sense to feel this flow of energy connecting you with the things in your room. Now feel your felt sense expand to fill the whole space of the room and everything in it. Sense the boundary of the room, above, below, and all four sides. Put your awareness at these boundaries and sense farther out to what's beyond the room. Now choose a wider area, perhaps the whole building, a piece of land you're on, the neighborhood you live in. And expand your felt sense to include all the objects, all the beings in this space. What does it feel like to sense into this whole space? In what way are you part of this space? How is this space a part of you? Now choose one even wider area, perhaps your geographic region, your state or country, the earth as a whole, or even beyond. Let your felt sense expand to fill this space. Where are you in relation to this space? Are you outside this space, observing it, holding it in your awareness? Are you a tiny piece inside the vast space? Do you fill the whole space and sense its boundaries as your own? Are there any fixed boundaries? Pay attention to the felt sense in your body right now. What does it feel like to be actively tuning in to your participation in these larger wholes? Think of a word or an image to help you remember this felt sense. Now bring your awareness back from this larger space, back to your neighborhood or building, and back to your room, feeling the walls, floor, and ceiling around you. And back to the boundaries of your physical body. Feeling yourself as an individual subject located in your room, become aware again of all the things that are located in space around you. Your body parts, your room, your neighborhood, the earth. Recall the word or image you use to capture your felt sense of participating in the larger wholes that surround you. Let's keep this felt sense of our multi-layered and ever-changing spatiality present as we end this meditation. Move your body around a bit, take some deep breaths, and open your eyes if they were closed. I find these kinds of meditation very valuable for work with other than human beings because they open us to a wider sense of what exists and what is possible. And they also help tune us into our own felt sense, which I find very valuable in order to make distinctions between the felt sense of my own being, felt sense of things outside my body and energy space that I might be connecting with. So at this point, I would like to take a quick pause and see if there is anything that anyone wants to share about that. There'll be plenty of time for sharing all through the presentation. You can just raise your hand if there's something you'll want to say, or I'll go on. Sarah.
Thank you so much, Linda. That's such a nice way to begin a talk. And I love that it settles us and it gets us out of the busy, which can be so streamlined and narrow focused, to really think of where we are in our world and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, to echo that, it's just a very nice reset to sort of have a break with those, the emotions that might continue to be reproduced in every moment, and now you have a nice excuse to insert a different type of perception and a different type of way of feeling what is present.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I definitely always feel better afterwards. Okay. So one of the things that I've learned through this whole academic process is how important it is to situate ourselves, to situate anything we're talking about. But I think that includes ourselves. And that's why I wanted to bring a little bit of a more personal element into this talk. So I'm going to start by sharing just a little bit about my background with you. I'm going to show you some pictures. If I can find them, yes. Okay, so my dad is Egyptian, and these are some of my Egyptian ancestors. He is the child in the bottom picture on the left, the older child, and that's his family. And the two upper pictures are his grandparents, so my great-grandparents. I believe the grandfather is Turkish, and the rest of the family is Egyptian. Now, what came to me through my dad is the part of his story where they moved to the US when he was 12 years old and experiencing some racism because of their brown skin and their names and their culture. Their way of reacting to that was to change their names to American names, forget their language, forget their culture, lose their religion. And actually, my grandmother went back to Egypt after a year and left her family, including her small daughter. But my grandfather married an American woman and they became American. So there's this past that's come to me of closing down difference, shutting down anything that's different, and just following the American dream. That feels pretty strong for me. My mom is the rightmost child on the picture with all her siblings on the bottom. And on the top pictures, my opa, my grandpa, is the little baby being held in the one picture. And the other picture is my oma, my grandma. My mom's side of the family is first that she was born in the bottom of a burning hospital in Berlin during the biggest air raid of World War II. So she grew up starving and fleeing and with a lot of love and fun as well. But I feel like what has come to me through that is this feeling of scarcity and of wanting to be safe and gathering things for myself, making sure there's always enough food and enough. That's one piece. The other interesting piece is my oma. She was quite psychic, and all through her life, she saw things before they happened. She knew things, she could find water. Yet she found this powerful ability to be what she called a curse. And tried to make it stop, but couldn't. And so my mom grew up with this feeling that it's not okay to be like that, to be witchy, perhaps I'll say. And so I feel like this has come through to me too, this feeling again of trying to mute all the differences or the strangenesses and following the American dream. This is what my parents met in America. And I think in my perception of growing up, this is the container that was given to me. And being a rather muted child and not speaking out for my core self, I sort of adapted to this way of life. But in the picture I've shown above, there's something about this specific picture that triggers a memory for me that I was in touch with things, that I was there in nature, a part of nature, speaking with nature and aware of a different kind of beingness. But that all went away, and it's still partly away. I still feel this coming out now. So, important point to make, how so much of our society probably has put all of these abilities and these understandings of a deeper form of connection in life aside to follow what is the current way of living in this American society, at least. So this is what I did. I paid too much attention to the natural world or the social world and kind of lived in an analytical world of mental abstractions, stayed away from all the messy things like the body and society and such. And let's see here. I'm gonna skip way ahead now because that's just sort of the regular life growing up. But I wanna share with you when this changed. And so I think I was in my mid-30s somewhere, and I had achieved this American dream. And after going into engineering and science and finding, you know, there aren't really any final answers in science after all. And scientific research isn't satisfying to me because there's all these questions that are never being asked. So I went into biotech and I worked in production and efficiency, and it was fun. And I had a house and a family and cats and dogs and a successful career, but something happened. And it's interesting. I'll tell you first how it happened and then how I see it now. So I would be at work, sitting there, looking out of my office window at a tree, and the leaves of the tree would be shimmering in the light and dancing in the wind. And my gaze would just constantly be pulled out, and I didn't know why. And I would leave the building and start walking around the business park. And I often went for walks at the marsh, and I would walk fast and get exercise. But here I just walked really slowly around the business park, and I looked at all the plants. It was like they were drawing me in. And so I would just walk like I was in this trance, looking at everything. And then I would start having these visions go through my mind's eye, I suppose. And I'd go back to work and go back to my mental work, and then I'd go away, and then I'd go back outside and walk, and the visions would continue over weeks. And it pulled me out of this comfortable slumber that I was in. And long story short, a bunch of different things for a few years, I ended up leaving my career altogether and joining the PCC program. So now, looking back with the context that I have, I feel that I was woken up out of my slumber by nature. And I wouldn't have seen it that way then because I didn't have a framework for even thinking of nature as intelligent or participating. But it feels clear to me there, and in other circumstances I can pick throughout my life where there have been these moments where nature has called to me, and I maybe listened a little bit but not quite followed it. But I'm very grateful that I followed it this time. So let's see. I'm going to tell you just a few things about my time during PCC that are relevant to the work that I'm doing now. One piece, of course, was the analytical part, because I was still in a very mental place, and studying the philosophy classes at PCC and other classes gave me this understanding of the nature reality some of you may have experienced that just turns everything upside down and inside out and expanded my whole experience of reality. And this is what resulted in my first guiding question, having to do with these unconscious assumptions that frame the way we think and act and our society gets built. I want to go into this a little bit, because it'll help us give a framework for talking about collaborating with other than human beings. So I have a couple of slides. I've distilled it into 3 points that many of you are certainly already familiar with, and I'll go through. These are some of the points that really stuck out to me as limiting us, especially in being able to do things like work with other than human beings. One has to do with dualisms. And of course, the main one is the ontological and epistemological separation between nature and culture, where only the human mind has agency and everything else is a passive resource. And this also includes other humans that are excluded from the dominant framework. Interestingly, when I delved into the history of this a little bit, this arose in the 17th century Europe along with the eradication of non-dual practices, which includes ritualistic practices or practices in which other than human beings or spirits are efficacious and participate. So all of that kind of went away with the dualistic paradigm. And another way we see this is the dualism between matter, the stuff of the world, and meaning, that they have no necessary connection to one another. And meaning is only generated by human brains, excuse me, by human minds. So this is one limiting assumption. Another one, looking at it metaphysically, is this individualist metaphysics. If you look at Newtonian physics, for example, or Descartes, the ultimate entities are these determinate individuals. They're separate, they're pre-existing, they're fully formed. There's no process of coming into being or perishing. There's no form of possibility or potentiality or indeterminacy that's integral to beingness. And there's no necessary relation to any other individual. If you studied Whitehead at PCC, you know that there are alternatives to this. And the final unconscious assumption that factors into this talk today is what I call physicocentrism. This is the assumption that in order for something to exist and be efficacious, it must have a physical basis. And by physical, I mean generally that which the scientific world considers to be real. And to be real, something has to be perceptible. We have to be able to perceive it with our physical senses and their extensions, microscopes and telescopes. So we have to be able to somehow point to something, perceive it, and then measure it, which requires a certain kind of space-time that we call a world with 3 dimensions, where you can use instruments to take repeatable measurements. This is all part of scientific practice. And another part is the reductionism, this idea that in order to figure out what something is, we take it apart and reduce it into parts. And all of those parts have to have this physical basis that we can measure. These things really impacted me and led me on a quest to figure out, how do we overcome these? But before I part, the one other piece that was really important and unexpected for me during the PCC journey had to do with recognizing that it turns out I'm not just a mental being. I don't just live in my mind. So I was thrown into this sudden chaos, realizing, wow, I have a body, there's feelings through my body. And this might sound funny to people who've always been embodied, but to a really analytical mental person who always practice isolating themselves from any kind of feelings or body, this is a huge deal. And I think it's important to talk about so that we can recognize when this is the case for other people. And until we become in touch with our own body, it's hard to work on coming into touch with other than human beings who, unlike humans, are likely in touch with their bodies naturally. So that's why I'm bringing these points together here, because I think for collaborating with other than human beings, we need both things. We need a bit of a framework for understanding how it could be possible for a wider sense of reality, and we need to be in touch with our own felt sense. So when I left PCC and started this PhD program at UC Santa Cruz, I felt like I had become embodied and like I had a much wider perspective on the nature of reality. And of course, I still had a ton to learn, but it was a good starting point. So let's see. Are there any questions so far about anything I've said, any clarifications you need before I go into how I framed my work with other than human beings?
I'll jump in. I love what you're talking about. I just have a kind of nerdy question, I guess. It's physicocentrism. Is that your word, or is that from somewhere?
That's a word that I just used all through my dissertation because it seemed very appropriate. I tried to look it up and I saw that it seemed to be used sometimes in some places, but not really regularly or as defined in some really clear way. So I just used it as my own. Thank you. Okay, so eventually at UC Santa Cruz, I came up with my dissertation project. And it's about, it was based on the work at Findhorn in Scotland. So I'm wondering if people are generally familiar with Findhorn. And I learned about it at PCC. So I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail. I'll just say a couple of highlights of how I understand it so that we're all on the same page together. And the initial founders of Findhorn, they were very spiritual, but also empirically minded. And they didn't intend, this is what I learned from reading all the various texts, they didn't intend to go and connect with nature beings. They were just working in their gardens, and they tended to be in states of love and joy and listening to their inner divinity, the voice of the God within. So they weren't looking to establish contact with beings, but apparently being in that sort of a state of harmony and love and practicing sending positive radiations into the plants around them, contact was made by the beings with them. And so there are all these stories of how they came to accept and appreciate these contacts and to learn how to collaborate with them in growing the plants in the garden, but also in more than just that. So when I learned about this, I just thought, you know, if this really can happen, what a revolutionary way for us to address some of these problems we're having, especially ecological ones. And so I proposed it, and surprisingly was allowed to do this in my dissertation research, which was wonderful. So just to say a few words about the beings, because I'll be talking about beings called devas and nature spirits, just to give us some kind of other than human beings to talk about. For the Findhorn people, they talked about the devas as being altogether beyond space-time and holding the patterns or the forms of existence. So a deva for the pea plant would hold all the possibilities and all the patterns for any pea plant that could ever be, and would direct its energy to help create these forms in space-time. In contrast, the nature spirits were said to be etheric, or to take on these etheric bodies, which are a different kind of matter, not our physical matter, and work with the life force of the plants to infuse individual plants with life force. So each individual pea plant growing in the garden would have different nature spirits working with it. Now, it's hard to make sense of this in our current scientific framework, because as you've seen by these underlying assumptions, if something isn't physical, it just isn't really considered real, or there's these strange dichotomies between, okay, well, there's meaning and there's mind, but we're not sure how those fit in. But basically, if you can't point to something and measure it, it's really hard to know what to do with it. So I spend the dissertation looking at alternative frameworks in which it does or can make sense. And my main influences were Whitehead, and then Whitehead as furthered by Eric Weiss, Gebser, Goethe and Steiner, and then Karen Barad, who I ended up using Karen Barad's agential realism framework in my dissertation. But it could have been done with Whitehead or with others as well. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the analytical part, but I do want to get a little bit of a common vocabulary for talking about how I have worked with overcoming these assumptions and talking instead about wholeness and interconnection. That's the way that I'm going to talk about it here tonight. So before we saw that all these ultimate entities, individual bits that aren't related to each other. But in this framework, the ultimate entities are wholes. And wholes are relational, and fully dynamic. So they are inclusive of possibility, inclusive of process. There's nothing static here and nothing alone. Wholes are ethico-onto-epistemological, and probably more included in that too. But the important piece is that there is no being without knowing, no without being, and everything is already ethical. There's nothing that you can do or be and then bring in the ethics afterwards. So everything happens together. Everything becomes together. So the dualisms that we talked about, they don't pre-exist. Anything that we see as reality is relationally interacted. Now, interacted is one of Karen Barad's terms, and we can also just think of it as a dynamic form of inaction, or an iterative coming into being. So there's a whole, and the whole is relationally differentiated so that there's these parts that feel like they're separate. There's me and there's you over there, and I think we're separate and there's no connection, or there's me in my mind and there's nature over there. But that's only the way that we've separated them out, and it's not the way that it has to be. And ultimately, everything has come out of a whole that is already imbued with meaning and everything else. Now, a big one, I think that we're so set on seeing humans as having different things than other beings, that we have this superior or different kind of intelligence, this agency, subjectivity that nothing else has, or if they do, there's this question of where you draw the line. It gets very complicated in philosophy. But in this framework, humans are not ontologically special. You start with a whole, yes, a human can differentiate out of it, but so can anything else. And there are no pre-existing attributes like knowledge, but these are things that we become differentiated with as they become a part of us as we come into being. Finally, and this is the one, this was really the key in my dissertation and the piece that I added into existing frameworks, which is that if things are relationally differentiated and there's no pre-existing space or time, but space-time matter, again, one of Karen Barad's terms that just shows how they're completely inseparable from one another. If space-time matter is something that always comes into being, then who's to say that it has to come into being in terms of physical parameters, like with 3 dimensions that equally spaced intervals and clocks ticking away at their own interval. Therefore, it's certainly possible that space-time matter can come into being etherically or in all sorts of other, what I would call trans-physical ways. So that may a mouthful or a mindful, but if you just come away with a sense of wholeness and interconnection, interaction, a sense of overcoming these limitations, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about how this relates to the discussion on other than humans. So first of all, like I said, humans aren't special, and other than human can also be interacted as part of dynamic wholes. Humans are special, but everything is special in its own way. So there's no reason these others can't exist. And like we said, space-time matterings can come in all different forms. So there can be beings enacted who don't have a physical component to them at all, and it still can be considered to be part of matter, part of reality. It may not be measurable, but that doesn't mean it's not real, doesn't mean it can't be interacted with. And like I alluded to before, when attributes like knowing, agency, and subjectivity are no longer belonging to individuals, but part of the dynamic coming into being of everything, then they're available for everything that comes into being. That's not to say that, that everything interacts with the same knowing. In fact, moment to moment, we don't either. It's all over the board. Sometimes we're in an intelligent space, sometimes we're doing rote behaviors. But the option is always there. No one's excluded. And finally, this question of, okay, fine, say that these other beings exist. But how can we connect with them? We're so different. Well, remember, neither of us pre-exists as individuals. We mutually create and recreate one another in these interactions. Therefore, if I come into being and part of my being is my knowing of the other that I have separated from, then I have an inherent connection to everything. And it should be possible to be able to tune into that and learn how to connect in new ways. Now, I don't think it's necessarily new. I think we do this as humans too, but we don't necessarily see that part because we're used to being able to say that our connections come through the words we speak to each other or through body language. But I believe it's more than that anyway. So the last piece here, the responsibility. This is important. This has to do with the ethics again, is that if we are co-constituting one another, what I become, I have responsibility also for what you become. There's this piece of this inherent responsibility that the way that we come into being has an effect on who we and others are. And so to start waking up to that feeling of responsibility and acting a little bit more consciously, or trying to, in the way that we show up as part of these wholes, has become a really interesting question for me. But to get there, it was a bit of a journey, because during the dissertation process, I studied all of this analytically, of course, and that was important too. But I want to share with you this felt sense experience that I had. You're looking here at the beautiful view from the deck of my family student apartment where I lived for a few years while doing the PhD. And from a corner of the deck, you could see the ocean. And it was just so special to have that apartment. And so I would sit out there. One summer I had a few weeks alone. And I mean, such a luxury to have this time and this space. And I spent a lot of time just sitting and not doing the analytical work and just kind of feeling into what I was doing. It was like I was sort of stopped there and mesmerized. And once I was eating breakfast, and like many times when I eat breakfast or food, I gave gratitude for having all this food and acknowledged that there are so many people who don't have this food or any food. And millions of times I've thought that or acknowledged it, but this one experience changed, and I stopped partway through a bite and I was just frozen for this long time in the space of deep felt sense experience, my interconnection with all of that, that how I was living and moving at that moment was not separate from how all other people were having their experience. And that I have some kind of a responsibility to that, some kind of a role to play, even if I can't directly go fix something, to be more aware of how I live and how I choose what I do. And I bring this in because maybe it just slips through the cracks sometimes to really notice that difference between studying something and thinking about it, talking about it from a detached point of view. It might be analytical, it might just be detached, but to have the felt sense in the body of something, I feel like it changes my values. And it's so important that we take the time to slow down and open ourselves to the possibility of having such experiences so that the important work we do can integrate into us and inform the way that we make our choices. So this is what led to this new guiding question. You know, I don't want to do this just analytically. How can I live this way? What does it mean to live as this active participant in these wholes? And these guiding questions are also very important because I think for me, when I know I have a good guiding question is because it affects all the different parts of my life. So this didn't affect just my research. It also affected the way I showed up in my family. Instead of sort of trying to keep them busy all the time so I could work on my own work, I made my family a priority and took time to create family values and family talking circles and experiences. And it changed so much in my life. And when I finished the dissertation, I spent this past year volunteering in my community, something I'd never chosen to do before. So that's just in my own personal sense, how to felt sense experiences made a difference. So I have one last thing to tell you about formative factors, I suppose, before delving into my work, current work. So at the end of my time at UC Santa Cruz, right when completing the PhD, I went to a conference there on indigeneity and climate justice. At this conference, I heard Chairman Valentin Lopez of the Amamutsun tribal band, which is the area that we now call the Santa Cruz and Monterey region, speak. And he spoke about the colonial violence that his people experienced in the past and also were still experiencing. Now, again, this is an example of something that I knew about. I was aware of it. I hadn't sought any closer engagement with it in the past, you know, given my choices of living this more analytical, distant lifestyle. So for me, this was a huge moment to feel this, to really viscerally feel these are my people, and this is how they feel and keep feeling. I just want to share two things he said. One is that for healing to occur between Indigenous peoples and the colonizers, that we need to listen to each other's stories. That it's just about listening to each other's stories and being present. And I've learned so much from seeking out Indigenous scholars and writers and artists in book and article form, and reading and learning and just listening to influenced what I'm doing now. And he also said the focus here was climate change, that white people can't solve climate change, that they need to work with Indigenous peoples, and that Indigenous peoples must be the ones to lead the way. One reason I think it's so important to bring this piece in is because with the work that I'm doing, which I feel like, you know, I'm doing this important work, and I think this is one of the ways we need to work with other than human beings to address ecological issues. But I didn't make any of this up. No, I'm not discovering something new or creating something new. And I just want to be clear about that Indigenous peoples have been doing this kind of connecting with a relational, spiritual forever, and they've been persecuted for it and are not heard. So even though my inquiry is about listening to other than human voices, I want to make sure to also listen to human voices. Okay, I'm going to come back to the question for a moment to resituate us. How do we become a mutually human member of the cosmic community? Clearly, the human community itself needs a lot of healing from colonialism and other isms. Clearly, the Earth community needs a lot of healing too from all the extractive technologies of our industrial society. And the cosmic community, I'm not so sure about. I just want to make sure to exclude anything. And I do feel like we need to start recognizing and honoring the larger spaces and other types of beings. So the next thing I'm going to into some of the research I'm doing now on the land here, including some of the methods I've used in learning how to work with these other than human beings. So before shifting, I'd like to see again if there are any questions or comments someone would like to make now. I feel like that was kind of a mouthful of a lot of different details. All right, great. So we're ready to move into the heart of the presentation. So this work still feels very new and raw to me, but I'd like to share it with you. My overarching inquiry is about creating a place here on this land with the beings of the land, where humans can learn to work with these other beings in service of our mutual flourishing. Now, according to the Findhorn texts, the devas and the nature spirits are sick and tired of the way that humans are treating nature. At least this was back in the 60s. I think it hasn't gotten any better. So this is a very important reason to explore our relationships with these beings. Also, for my dissertation work, where I showed how possible for these other than human beings to exist and be efficacious in the physical world, what I really came away with was this feeling of this multi-layered, interactive reality where physical space-time mattering is only one way in which reality can be enacted. So I tend to sense into this reality where there's all sorts of other things happening that we can't touch the same way that we touch the physical. And this part of my work was based on Eric Weiss's transphysical process metaphysics. And when he taught this to us at PCC, it was based on Whitehead's work. He left us with a question that I've always carried with me and that I'm now actually exploring. And that question, he called these other worlds transphysical worlds, is how can we explore the transphysical worlds? So for me, it's not just that we're inviting other types of beings into our physical world, but that we need to learn how to engage directly with other space-time mattering. So when I do my work on my land, or on this land here, I don't mean to call it my land, I'm working to connect with beings and to sense into other space-time matterings, other places, if you will. And I feel like we're always already inhabiting these other places, but we're just not aware of them so actively. The other interesting piece of this work is that the whole premise of this different framework of being, that things happen co-creatively. So this is not me. It's so easy for a human to fall back into their own values and goals. I'm going to go out on the land. I have my plan. This is what we're going to get done. And here's my goal. But I don't want to do that. So in working co-creatively, I go out there and I have an inquiry. I have something I'm going to hold, and I'm going to invite others to share it with me. But I'm going to be open to what emerges and not have a final answer. Of course, I'm sure I can't help but have some kind of expectation that this is something that I work on a lot, to stay open and receptive to what's happening. So I think one of the ways I can best share this with you is to talk about some of the methods I've used to learn how to do this. And I'm far from being an expert in any of this, and some of you may have things to share that are much more advanced. But again, I think it's valuable to talk about our experiences that we've had. So on this slide, this will be my last, and I'm going to just list some of the official kind of methods that I've used, and then they're more like recipes, and I don't really like following recipes. So then I'll go into how I've worked on my own. But in case you're interested, one big piece as I was reflecting on this is that I had been doing Qigong and some meditation, and I took up Aikido and more recently Tai Chi. And these practices have been key because starting out with being to have felt sense, not only of your own physical body in space, but of how the energy or the ki is moving in you and in relation to the world. And then partner practices like Aikido, you start to feel movements with another human partner. So these have been very formative for me in allowing me to figure out how to even get into space to try to connect. I'm also a very introverted person, but I find it easier to connect with other than human beings in some ways. Then, if you've heard of Perelandra, I don't know, but Michelle Small-Wright, independently of Findhorn, came up with similar experiences. She also connected with devas and nature spirits in her work with healing and with gardening. And she wrote some very detailed manuals of how to do this. So it was a good way to kind of have a starting approach. Then I had the pleasure of actually going to Findhorn about a half ago when they reopened this inquiry of working with subtle beings after 50 years, just in time for my decision. And so I had to go. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned things, I'll allude to some of them, but especially Dorothy Lane, who's the one of the co-founders who worked with the devas. Her writings and her inspirations were helpful. Now, the original founders of the Findhorn community, they were Rosicrucians. they study this, it's a mystical order, like the ancient mystery teachings. So wanting to my research and try to understand where the framework they were coming from, I started studying Rosicrucian studies also as part of my research. But I found that it had an effect too, and it kind of brought in more of a soul level or a divine level of being that had come through some of my studies already, but these Rosicrucian studies helped me to get in touch with that a little bit, to feel sort of my soul self or my bigger self, which ended up being very key, crucial in being able to inhabit that space when then going out and feeling around me to see what other beings are there. Finally, David Spangler was one of the very early Findhorn people who went there and developed their whole educational system. And he left eventually and founded his own institute, the Lorien Institute, which is in the US, and they have online webinar classes. So I've been taking some of their webinar classes on connecting with the subtle world. And interestingly, one of their teachers, she worked with Dorothy McLean for many years, traveling around giving workshops. And Dorothy McLean passed away a few months ago at 100 years of age. So there's this sort of direct lineage going back to there. And I want to make sure to mention that this is just one approach, one lineage. It's all white, Western, Christian types of lineage and approaches. And so I'm sure there are many other approaches in many other traditions. I don't mean to exclude any, but this is the one that I've come through so far. All right. Okay. So I'm going to just touch on a couple of different related pieces to give us some food for thought and for further conversation. One of them that really struck me, you know, I only talked about devas and nature spirits in my dissertation. That's really all that the Findhorn text talked about, and I just assumed that's all there is. I like it simple and clean, right? But when I went to Findhorn, they brought in all these other kinds of beings too. And according to David Spangler, who I just mentioned, and who has been exploring the subtle worlds for all of his life, the subtle ecology is at least as diverse as our biological ecologies. So that just kind of blew up in my mind again.
All right, it looks like we might be having some technical difficulties. Linda, are you there?
Yeah.
All right, well, hopefully she will come on. While we are waiting though, is anything coming up for other people?
Sean here. I'm going to keep my video off. Just a great presentation, very rich. Hope you can hear that, Linda. Yeah, I hope she gets back on.
Yeah, it looks like she's not a guest at the moment, or oh, there she is.
Okay, good.
Linda, you sort of cut out there a little bit.
Yeah, I think my internet quit. I'm surprised it's been so great so far.
Yeah, I was going to say Sebastopol is kind of iffy there with the internet connection sometimes.
Yeah, and we're kind of in a country little spot, so it's not the best. But I'm back.
Yeah, you got a strong connection. Please keep going.
Okay, great. So I was saying that there are other ways to connect to subtle beings as well. So sometimes people are asking, well, I don't feel any of this stuff. I don't know what you're talking about. But for example, in different religious traditions, people are sometimes very familiar with walking into their church and feeling a sort of a Christ consciousness or a Mary or something that they connect to. So this also is a form of feeling subtle energy and subtle beings. And also just nature, like being in a beautiful place in nature and having that feeling that you're just floored with the beauty for a moment and it just stops you and makes you feel vast. I think that that could be something very similar to connecting to the being of that place. So I think there are a lot of different ways to go about it, and that often it's more subtle than we think. So at the way that people first connected, as I mentioned, is that they weren't seeking connection, but they were in this open, receptive state and loving and joy. So one of the things that I've found from various sources is that that is a state of being that is more receptive. You could think of it too in terms of animal communicators. If you've ever watched, there's a particular documentary by someone named Anna Breitenbach, who's an animal communicator, and you just see how she moves into places with wild animals and just lies down in utter relaxation and love and beauty, and the animals come and surround her, and she is able to understand what they are feeling and saying. So it's this feeling of like that and relaxed and open that facilitates such connections. Then there's, of course, direct methods like this Paralandra method I alluded to before, that she has developed techniques where anyone can just follow a protocol. They can say, I now wish to be connected to this particular deva. And then you're connected. To be connected to these nature spirits. And then you can, within that container, you can then do different projects, is how it's framed in the work of hers that I used. So I'll just say a little bit about how that worked for me, because these methods weren't to get to know the beings so much, but to perform some kind of a specific function, like work on a project or do a healing. But in using these methods over time, I began to become familiar with different kinds of beings. So the way that a deva felt to me when I said I'd like to be connected to this deva, I would get this particular felt sense, experience. And it was very different than the felt sense when I would ask to be connected to a nature spirit. So I started discerning between different types of beings. So I do have a lot of different things that I can say about this, and experiences I can share that kind of show how these connections with beings have changed and have convinced me that there is something that is really happening. But I'm going to touch on a few other points first, and then wait and see what comes up in our discussion. So a couple of other pieces that I've learned along the way to go a little deeper into what it's like to experience another being, an unseen being, and to know that it's the same being as before, and that it's not just our imagination that's happening. So just like in psychology, we've learned that if we want to relate to other human beings, we have to know how to relate to ourselves. And we have to know something about ourselves to be able to know others. We have to be able to love ourselves to be able to love others. I think it's extra important when dealing with other than human beings that we have a pretty firm grasp on what our own presence feels like in the world, so that we know what is us and what is something else. If you've experienced any kind of journey, whatever it might be, something that takes you outside of yourself. You don't know, even, seeing a beautiful scene in nature, suddenly everything's vast. It's like, wow, where am I as part of this? Any kind of experience like that, you can get lost in it if you don't have some kind of a grasp on, okay, this is or what I can come back to. So one thing that I was working with the Lorient Institute classes have a really strong ways into practices that you can learn and try. So there's this way of coming into your own presence. And I'll just mention that a little bit, how that can work. You know, you can sit and consider, okay, what is my presence? You can think of your beingness, your values, the way you feel, the things you're proud of, all the different pieces of you that kind of come together to make you. Then if you tune in to the earth, you can usually feel the earth around you. You can feel nature around you. You can feel sometimes the energy of the earth coming up through your feet. So you feel that energy. Kind of tune in to the heavens, to the stars, the cosmos, feel that energy. Now, a lot of traditions, Aikido being one of them, talk about the human as being a bridge between heaven and earth. That's how we work in the Aikido practice, to bring together the energies of heaven and earth and use that in our relational dynamics, moving with others. Well, when in this practice of finding your own presence, you can feel this energy of the earth, you can feel the energy of the heavens, and then you can feel your own unique presence, how these things are all flowing together. They're not separate, but there's something about my presence. It's like its own light that shines with its own unique beingness in the world. I'm going to go out and try to connect with other beings and do some work. I'm going to go into that space where I feel strong in my own presence, and I can bring that out in order to connect with others, so they have something to come to and to interact with. So now what about getting information from other beings? You know, it's one thing to sense other beings and recognize them, but how do you hear what they have to say? Now, I think this is different for everybody. And sorry, I'm just changing here so I can see you all better. Okay. One important point to make, I think, is that what we are receiving is a whole experience. Not as if I'm going out to do some work and then I hear some voice and I write down what was said and that's it. I think we're engaging with an entire experience. And when I come away from this experience, like in a dream, we'll come out of a dream and we'll not only have something we can say, here's what happened in the dream, but there's this that comes along with it, like you were in these places and you experienced what happened in that dream. So when I tune into things, anything counts. You know, what am I feeling in the moment? Did I suddenly get hot or cold? Is something feeling weird in my feet? What kind of intuitions am I feeling? Did I suddenly have a thought that didn't fit in and just appeared? Or it could be anything. And one of the things I learned at Findhorn is that it's a lot more subtle than we might expect. So I have to admit, I did go to thought that, well, after being there for 5 days, maybe I'll learn how to see those beings and hear what they have to say. But really what I learned is that it's as simple as practicing, how do you feel different when you walk into a room? When you cross a threshold into a different room, do you sense the different energy in the room? Some rooms, you know, you don't want to go into. It's like, ooh, it doesn't feel good in there. Or you leave a room and it's like, oh, I've left something behind that was really nice and it felt good. So tuning into these subtle differences in our perceptions has been really valuable to start to acknowledge, okay, things are happening in these little differences. And sometimes I don't even notice anything, but then over time, as the days pass, something will change in my awareness. There's a lot of similarities in some ways with dream work and dream mazes. Okay, oh, one other interesting point. I think it's getting dark. I'm gonna turn on a light. Is this better? I can't see myself, so. One very interesting piece, because as humans, and especially these particular humans that I'm a part of, I tend to want to do a lot of stuff. You know, I want to reach out and actively do something. And so I've found that when I'm in this place of presence and maybe I've connected with some other beings and now I want something to happen. You know, maybe I have a question or an inquiry and I'll float that out in front of me. And then I'll want to go and grab an answer. You know, I'll want to kind of like go over there and figure it out. And when I do that, everything goes away and I'm left really confused. And so I've started to realize that's what's really important, is to stay in a quiet and receptive place, sort of in my own space, though really we're connected and interconnected. But I have to stay in a quiet place of receptivity, and that's when things start happening. A subtle way that I'll just suddenly get something or know something or feel this change happen that becomes a felt experience that I can talk about. So one of the things that I've done is kept a journal. And I started this about 1.5 years ago when I came back from Findhorn, but it fizzled out after a few months because it was very challenging. And so I finished up the dissertation and came back to it. For the past 6 months, I've been having weekly meetings out on the land with the beings, and I've written everything down that happens. And it's a wonderful way to go back and say, has anything even happened? And then you go back and you see, yes, a lot of things have changed and happened. Let's see. The last piece I want to mention is a really important one, because I know for me, maybe you have too, I never feel like I'm doing enough. I always feel like there's more I need to do or to get done. And especially in these engagements with these other beings, sometimes I'll go out there, I'll start this meeting, and then I'll hold the space, and I'll feel like I'm not doing anything. I can feel that the other beings are doing things, stuff is moving around and happening, and I'll, write it up. But I feel like, well, I should be doing something too. And one of the things I learned from the Lorian teachers is that as humans, that is what we're doing. We're holding the space. It's enough to have the intention, to create the space, to call in the beings, and to hold that. And so lately, I've really been working with that. It's enough to just be calm and receptive, hold this, and not feel like I always have to go in and actively make something happen. So I do feel like this engagement with other than human beings is such a good practice for everything else we do too. And I bring this back into how I act with other humans and with other parts of my life too. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now. And like I said, I have other stories I can tell and things I can talk about that go into more details, or we can look at whatever kinds of things you guys are interested in talking about at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. And I'm going to just encourage everyone to feel free to unmute themselves if you'd like, and give Linda a thank you for
yes, clapping, sound of clapping from Sean here.
Thank you.
And since I have to leave, I just want to rich and organically, beautifully organically sharing of your research and your experience, and so much more than just research and experience. But I'm really struck by how you followed through in a Goethean methodology for the subtle worlds, and how you've integrated so much of your prior learning, but continuing to embody it. The central theme of presence. And anyway, it's all very impressive, and I hope I have a chance to talk with you more about it, since it intersects with many of the elements of my own experience, including my Tai Chi practice and subtle activism and so on. So anyway, just to say thank you, and how impressed I am, and how good it was to see you again.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate that you came, and I too look forward to more conversations and Tai Chi.
Ah, wonderful. Okay, be well.
You too.
Awesome. And if anybody has any questions, you are more than welcome to either write them in the little chat box, either privately or publicly, and we'll read those. Kealey?
Yeah. Linda, it's so great to see you, and what a fantastic, grounded, presentation. I feel like you're embodying some of what you're talking about as you're also speaking it. And I appreciate that a lot. I would love to hear more of your stories, like what, especially with regard to your journal in the last 6 months or things that you've discovered. I'd love to hear more of the details of some of your experiences or stories. So.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just, computer started doing weird things. So let me get resituated here. Okay. Let me see, are there any other questions that can kind of help direct that, like which pieces to talk about? And if not, I'll just dive in and tell some other stories and then we go on.
I had a bunch of questions actually. I'll start with maybe a couple. So my question was, because I had come from Santa Cruz to CIS because there was something missing at Santa Cruz that I found at CIS, and presumably vice versa. So I was kind of wondering how that experience was for you, and then also if you had any of your own experiences or relationships with the nature spirits on the Santa Cruz campus. I'd be curious about that.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead. I'll answer your first question first, and then I'll go into some stories. And Kealey, also, it's just wonderful to see you, even just on the screen so far. So I came from this analytical background. Then I went to PCC, and then I went back to the analytical world. And I just felt like I had this need to, I don't know, carry the torch of PCC. And what it felt like was going back into a dark cave with a little light. And it was challenging because there wasn't a common language anymore being in that analytical department. So it was rewarding to be able to come to a place of producing a dissertation where I could speak in the analytical language and bring in these concepts that you're not usually allowed to bring into analytical departments. So it was nice when I was done, and now I can delve back into what I really want to be doing and not hide behind this need to be analytical all the time anymore. I did not connect to being specifically while I was at Santa Cruz. I've been here for 2.5 years now in Sebastopol, and I didn't start doing a lot of that work until now. But I'm sure it would be a magical place to do it in all the redwoods. Okay. Let me think about what kind of stories it would make sense to talk about. So I'm thinking, talking about how I came to kind of recognize different types of beings and how that shifted in my awareness is one sort of story. So to talk about devas, for example, devas often, there can be a deva for a plant type, like a pea deva or a broccoli deva, but there can also be overlighting devas. So a whole region could have its own deva. So when I moved to this land here, I asked, well, may I be connected with a deva of this land? And sure enough, I got this felt sense of how I often feel a deva to be. So what that is for me, and again, I'm sure it's different for everyone, I get the sense of a beingness that's kind of stretched way up high, and it's holding a space, a particular space. So the overlighting deva of healing, which you connect to in some of these methods I had used before, would show up like that and then kind of hold the space of healing. And a certain quality comes with that, or a set of qualities. So the deva of this land here was similar. It seemed to hold this land and have a certain set of qualities. Well, when I started this project working on the land, I asked to be connected to the deva of the project. And I didn't get that sense. I just got this sort of whirring, wild, crazy energy all around me. And over the weeks, it kept changing in relation to me, and it was kind of like going on a journey, and these visions would just keep happening. I'd be like, wow, what's happening now? I would just keep asking to be connected and listen to my felt sense of what was happening. Well, I knew that this was the deva of the project and that we were working together, and I could feel that. And just in the last month, after the last 6 months of intense work, suddenly this deva changed, and it changed into the same kind of feeling I usually have, where it's like she I don't want to say it, so I just say she or he, depending on what it feels like at the moment. And she felt like she moved up and she held the space of this project in a new way than had happened before. And so I remembered in some of my reading of the Findhorn texts that when they were developing their garden, the deva was not existent yet. It was coming into being, and they described it like a newborn baby with its eyes not open yet, and then it would grow over time to become this full deva, which I always thought was kind of funny. But I realized that this is the kind of experience I had, that my new deva was just this whirring of energy and lots more felt stuff I could, recall or talk about. But then it somehow grew up, and as the space was being created into this inquiry, this common inquiry, it's like it gained a certain amount of coherence. And when it gained that coherence, suddenly this deva was holding the space in a new way. So that was one of my experiences with beings, and how I kind of recognized, okay, something's really happening here, and this is a being, and it's not always going to be the same, but I can still recognize it. Another one was with nature spirits, or what I thought were nature spirits. So I don't know if anyone has ever heard of the Sidhe, S-I-D-H-E. Yeah, so that was one of the other kind of beings I learned about at Findhorn that are apparently cousins of humanity. So they're an evolutionary sort of being, but they don't live in the dense physical world like we do. And some of them are wanting to connect with us and regain our wholeness that we've lost when we split apart. I don't really want to go into the detail of that now, but suffice to say that there are these other beings that a lot of people are working with nowadays. They're popping up in all sorts of different people's experience, and they're working with them. So I went home from Findhorn, and when I started my inquiry, I asked, should the Sidhe be included? And the feeling was this feeling that they're somewhere on the periphery, but they didn't want to be included. So I just left it. And I would ask the nature spirits to be present. They seemed to want to be included. And for me, that's an energy of just sort of this intense, like bubbly, little exciting movements. Like around a particular plant, there might be this flashy, bright, bubbly movement of love and excitement and joy, just like nature bubbling up. That's what I feel when I connect to nature beings. But now, about 3 months ago or so, when I would connect, I would think, this is changing. They just don't feel the same anymore. They feel like these pillars of light, and these pillars, they're much more elegant and refined than they used to be. And they're working with my project in a much different way. They're like really present and working with me. And, weeks and weeks went by where I kept noticing how they were changing. And then one day I thought to ask, are you nature spirits? And I realized they weren't nature spirits, because when I tuned into the nature spirits the way I usually did, they still felt the same. And so I asked, are you the Sidhe? And I felt that that's who they were, and that they had come and joined in the inquiry, but I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know to ask all that time. And I had that feeling, wait a minute, this is something else. I need to ask and learn about what's happening here and connect in different ways. So then that opened up a whole new section of the exploration. So those are some stories about connecting with the beings and how that has changed. There's also been a being who left the inquiry. So when I was at Findhorn, we did an exercise in one of the workshops about connecting with, they call them our higher human helpers, who could also be known as ascended masters. You may have heard some of these terms. And the idea is that some kind of human souls that have finished their evolutionary journey in the physical earth are still working to help beings in the physical plane. And sometimes these can be beings that are with us and helping to guide us. So we did a meditation connected to any of these beings, and something came up for me. A lot of people have these amazing stories of white robed figures coming all around them, and I don't get that, but I got this feeling of this being that was there with me. And so I asked if it was going to be included in my inquiry when I came back home. And yes, that felt sense showed up every time I opened up the connection, and it served to really stabilize me. So at the beginning, I felt really like squirrely, like not knowing what I was doing. And I would like come into a place of being present, and then I would just drop right back out again. It was very difficult to maintain my sort of bigger self, is what it felt like to me. And so I would concentrate on this being, and he seemed like a he would stabilize me. I would just like feel the being right here, and it would stabilize my presence and allow me to continue with the work. And my relationship to the being changed over time. So I would feel that I was kind of not needing him as much anymore, or I was able to kind of sit with him, not use them as this post to lean on and help me. And one day he turned around and walked away. So, you know, the felt sense was that this energy that's usually in front of me looking at me just like turned away from me and started to disappear. And I asked several times, you know, can you stay? Because it was a bit of it was a familiar presence, but it was time. It just moved on and left. And then I was supposed to take on that role myself and hold my own energy present in a new way. So yes, those are some of the stories with the beings in particular. I could also talk about some stories with the inquiry and how that's shown up in my felt sense. But let me just check in and see what other kinds of questions might be coming up. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. I know in a lot of the other PCC forums I listened to, there were lots of long questions. Well, do you want to keep hearing me talk about some more experiences and stories? Do you want to stop? Should we wait a little longer for some questions to appear? What's people's sense?
I think we should wait a little longer and have people get up the nerve to ask these questions, which I know are bubbling up.
You see my tendency to want to reach out and control the space and make things happen.
Yeah, no problem. So one of the things I liked about your presentation, well, first of all, I had a professor who did his dissertation on several different intentional communities, and Fine-Tuning was one of them. And he found that it was sort of correlated with a higher desire for participation in environmental activism. And it sort of makes sense if you've got, if you're like making these direct personal connections with these spirits and devas, you know, land defense becomes a really kind of big piece. So I just wanted to commend you on your work, and I think the sort of framework that you've put together has really interesting implications, because I know for me, you know, devas and all of these spirits were very foreign to me, and when when people talked about it, I didn't really know how to interpret that. But I think translating through an analytical framework or what have you offers a lot of help and facility to those of us who might be more, or at least grounded in more physical centric kind of ways of knowing, or those premises or assumptions. So thank you for that, first of all. One of the questions I had was, along with that, I was wondering if, you know, you talked about dualism, and we tend to sort of think about like nature and culture as a kind of dualism, and you know, the city and the country, or the urban and the rural as cities and even artificiality and natural. So I was just wondering if you thought, you know, living in a city like San Francisco, you experienced, or you might have been aware, or you think there is a possibility for like sidewalk spirits, or you know, skyscraper devas, or traffic jam spirits, or you know, and stuff like that, or is it more, you know, in a city there are still pockets of nature and flowers and grasses, in which case how are the urban spirits doing, if there are such a thing?
Okay, let me try to remember all those pieces. One thing is that in the original Findhorn text, I was reading mostly about nature, spirits, and areas in nature. But since then, the people who have continued on at Findhorn, not very publicly with this work, and also Dorothy McLean and her ongoing work and workshops as she traveled around the world, they really started to focus in on the devas of cities and countries. And I think this is more of a form of spiritual activism then, because you can work with, you know, human-made societies and areas that devas have also become a part of, to perhaps try and do some healing or understanding of, you know, what's going on in the city as a whole. So in relation to devas or connecting to nature beings in cities, there's a couple things that come to mind. One of them is something that felt really important to me that I learned way long ago while I was still in biotech. And I had started doing a little bit of meditation, the first ever. And I thought, well, I can't meditate unless I have lots of quiet and lots of room around me. But I was sometimes in these small places and I needed to do some kind of a meditation. And what I learned was that it came from a meditation, actually. It was about feeling the silence between the sounds. So even when there was so much going on and just all this noise, even if it seemed like constant noise, there was always a way to feel into the space between the sounds. And same thing if I was in a tiny little closet, which I had to do when I was pumping breast milk for my infant and I was at work. And I was only given this little closet to go into. And I would sit there feeling claustrophobic, and then I would meditate and realize, okay, but there's space between all the atoms. And I can feel that. And I can go into a vast quiet space, even in the midst of all this ruckus and closed in walls. So I think that's important. And the teachings from Findhorn have made pretty clear, I think, that if you're in joy and a feeling of joy, deep joy, present joy, you're connecting to the nature beings, even if you're not having your bare feet on the ground, right? And yes, to any crack in a sidewalk with a weed coming up, that's as much nature and as full of nature spirits as any. As for whether these have a different feeling to them, like they're more upset or something because they're not being treated as well in a city, even at Findhorn, some of the experiences were that the nature spirits, not so much the devas are kind of seem to be these more impartial beings that are outside of space-time, just sort of holding these patterns. And the patterns include good and bad, right? They include growing as the most magnificent tree you can be and growing as a tiny scraggly weed coming out of cement. It includes all of that. And I don't think there's necessarily too many judgments. But the nature spirits would apparently become angry. So if even in this beautiful place with people who were intentionally trying to collaborate with them, they were learning, they made mistakes. And there's one story where they decided to cut down a whole bunch of something that was blooming. I think it was gorse, because it was in the way and it was taking up too much space. So they cut it all down, and there was this huge rift in the energetic feeling of the place because the nature spirits didn't want their blooms to be cut off in full bloom. That should have been something the humans consulted with them and maybe waited till they stopped blooming. So that's just an example to show that I don't think that there's nothing magically perfect about being out in a suburban or natural environment versus being in the city. And who knows, maybe some of the very important work to be done is in the cities with just the bits of nature that are around. And there are a lot of people who do subtle activism work and go around and help to heal places and beings, bodies of water, earth. I'm sure many of you might know more about that than I do. So that seems to be kind of in line with what you're asking, I think. Does that address your question?
Yeah, it does. And if you could type in the woman's name who was writing about the city spirits.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that. But that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll have to look. I'll get some resources on that for you if you're interested in reading about what people have come up with and see what I can find.
Thank you.
Linda, I've really been enjoying your talk immensely.
Thank you.
It's fascinating because I feel like I'm looking in the mirror a little bit. It's really so many parallels with my own doctorate work, and it's wonderful to hear how it's coming through you. And you're adding to my awareness. It's coming in, and the stuff comes in layers. And I'm so grateful to be on this call with you and to hear your journey through your doctorate and your thinking and your life and pre and post doctorate work. It's fascinating. I hope that maybe you'll drop your email in the chat.
I just did.
Oh, great. Great.
I think it's right.
I didn't see it come up.
Oh, sorry. It looked like it went privately to someone else instead of to everyone. So I'll send it here to everyone.
That's great. So,
and I'd love to hear from you. I'd like to invite you, Sarah, if you like. Do you have a few words that you would like to add to the discussion about that are sort of complementary? And no pressure, just if there's something that stood out for you that you thought, wow, this would really fit in well or further the discussion in some way. Feel free.
I had a feeling you might ask me that. I sometimes what happens to me is I kind of go into a deep listening mode and it takes a little while to click into response, but it did really feel like everything that you were speaking about are things that I'm looking at, interconnection, Indigenous ways of knowing. My methodologies are public ethnography and Indigenous research methodologies. Because I feel that the Indigenous piece is vital, because as you so nicely said, this is not new, it's ancient. And even back to Aristotle and Plato, you know, there were kinship systems in place, and that's when it started to change, at least from my research, favoring rational thinking and certain beings having rational mind, which makes it a lot easier to exploit certain people and the land and the beings on the land. Loved hearing more stories of, and your experiences at Findhorn, and even your own experiences on the land, because a lot of times we hear those stories connected to Findhorn with the devas and the nature spirits, but you have taken it out into your own world and gone through the practice of connecting, as you say, and it is practice and it grows all the time. And collaboration too, that's a big piece for me in my work. My work is looking at trees, the sentience of trees and communication with trees. And I traveled around, so it was an ethnography of people who work with trees in different ways.
I'd love to hear more about that. And actually what you say brings up one other interesting thing to share in a kind of more general way, because at Findhorn, when they had this conference, it had been 50 years since the initial work, and they'd been waiting for someone to come along and say that they were ready to host a conference to open up this inquiry again. And they didn't publicize it much. It was just listed on their website. So they didn't try to get attendees. And it ended up with a conference full of people from all over the world. I think every continent was represented. And so, you know, it's not just me, of course, but there are people all over who are asking these questions. They're having their own experiences in their own spaces, and they're asking what's going on, who else is doing this, how can we talk about this? And one big takeaway from that conference was that there was a lot of investment in this, but that there wasn't a lot of mental understanding of what was going on. So I think it's also really important to be writing these dissertations and doing the research with ethnographies. You know, my piece was more analytical. The ethnography piece, I think, is super important. And so I'm just excited to see that there are people interested and working in all different places. And even if we don't all know who we are and what we're working on, I'm starting to get a sense that when I open up these spaces to meet, that it's also some kind of a portal to all the other people who are doing this work, even though I don't know who they are and we're not physically connected, that somehow this work is happening in multi-layered ways. And that's pretty exciting. And
They're super
especially shelter in place, you know, because I don't feel very alone. I just have to go out into the land or sit here and just be present in this space with all the other beings and all the interconnections we have with each other. I'm very grateful for that.
Is the Fintorn conference that you're referring to the Co-Creative Spirituality conference? Yeah, that is such a great, I live streamed it. And it was even powerful as a live stream because it just comes straight into your space. And that is available online if anyone's interested in looking, checking that out.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning.
Yeah, yeah. And then I also did the Climate Change and Consciousness conference 6 months later, and that's also online and very, very powerful as well. Do you think maybe you could talk about some specific experiences you've had regarding collaboration, co-collaboration, there is no co in collaboration, collaboration with plants and humans? Have you had experiences?
I also see Kealey waving her hand.
Yeah.
Let me see what she has to say. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm just saying goodbye. I'm sorry. I have to get my son to bed, but it was so wonderful to be here. I just wanted to say goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank
Kealey.
you so
Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you too.
Bye.
Hope to see you again. Yeah, bye.
And I know we're running a little bit low on time too. So what is our time container here? And
the time container, Linda, is whenever you are tired of
okay.
answering questions, we will call that quits. It usually goes to 9, so that can be a nice excuse, but if we're having fun, I'm not
Okay.
gonna turn it off.
Okay, great.
Feel
Thank
free
you.
to go out whenever you'd like.
Okay. So yes, I heard Sarah's question about specific experience about communicating or collaborating with plants. And let me just gather and pause for a moment too to see if anyone else is needing to leave and has a last question or something that's come up.
Hey, I'm Vince here.
Vince.
Hey.
Are you Vince Worm?
Yeah.
Okay, I met you at the Bishop's Ranch because I remember you.
Oh, good. Yeah, same here. Yeah, I think a lot of what you're doing overlaps with my research over the past 2 years in groups that people that do contact with extraterrestrials. So what they have to go through in doing that, the states of mind and understanding what's going on and stuff is like very much in line with what it's kind of like what you're saying, but it's just, in this case, instead of nature spirits and divas, which some people do see when they go out there, when they open their awareness. It's the same type of communicating, relating, opening your mind. So I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind, I put my email in a private chat to you, but maybe sending I don't know if you feel comfortable sending parts of your dissertation my way or anything like that.
Oh, you can have the whole dissertation. It's on ProQuest and I can send you a copy. I have your email address from before.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm happy to send you a copy of it. It's long and analytical.
Yeah, that'd be great because I'm going to do my dissertation on that. And I think it's going to really overlap a lot of what your dissertation's about, but it's going to be applied to ETs.
Wonderful. And I remember you're in the cultural anthropology department, right? So you'll have yet another angle to
add to it.
Understand these things better. Yeah. Yeah. Very exciting. I'll
Awesome.
send that to you.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you for being.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So one reason I didn't jump right on Sarah's question is that I haven't had a lot of really experiences with the plant spirits directly that have kind of gone into further things. When I've tried to do that, like, okay, I want to connect with these particular plants that I'm planting in the garden, try to find out where should I plant you, how can I take care of you. It just hasn't gone into a lot of depth, and I've just felt like, okay, that's not where I'm supposed to be putting my effort. So I love that, and I love gardening, and so I've wanted to do more of that, but I've really kept it at sort of a more of a general level because it just hasn't progressed. I haven't been able to feel into that very clearly. So I think with this kind of a work, in a way, we have to go to where the next right step is. And for me, that seems to be in holding this other intention of the land on creating some kind of a portal space where we can better, as humans, learn how to work with these other kinds of beings and space-time matterings. But thank you for asking.
Thank you very much, Linda.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.
I am almost always in a listening space, so it's hard for me to spontaneously come up with some thoughts. But I'll say one thing about the writings of Alice Bailey. She writes a great deal about the Devas. And I think she had some influence on the people at Findhorn, at least many years ago. So these ideas are very familiar, and I appreciate your bringing them forward. And when you spoke of the indigenous knowledge, it just brings up for me the sadness that it would be so wonderful for these ideas to get out into the culture and into society, but the forces that will not allow it or are suppressing these ideas is something I think we need to be aware of, and it's going to be a struggle. I mean, it'd be lovely to have the indigenous people lead the way. That would be wonderful. But there's so many forces that will not want that to happen. So,
thank you for bringing that up. That's really feels like one of my my real edges. Like I have this feeling for it now, and I think that it's just not right for, you know, white people to be then the ones who come out and say, oh, here are these new things we need to do. But I'm not sure how the way forward looks. So I just keep it as part of the inquiry, and I'm trying to familiarize myself as much as possible with what's happening in my area already to hopefully try to connect with people. But there's also, for me, this fear of, okay, well, what am I going to do? Just go in and tell people, okay, here's what I'm working on. And I know that this is already your kind of work. So what are we going to do about it? You know, that's not really the right thing to do either. So this is really part of my ongoing inquiry as being new to this way of looking at things and thinking about things, how to hold that in a way that is mutually beneficial. And there's a quote I love. I don't remember right now where it came from, but the idea is that a white person goes in to, I think it was some kind of indigenous peoples, and says, I'm here to help. I want to help you. And they say, if you're here to help, you're wasting your time, go away. I know I'm butchering this, but if you're here because you know that your destiny is intertwined with mine, then we can talk. So that's the feeling I like to keep alive for me, is I'm putting this out there because I feel tied together with everybody, and I want to work together for our mutual flourishing. That's a phrase that came up a lot in my dissertation. I like to speak of things in terms of mutual flourishing. And yeah, for keeping that intention alive and trying to take actions that support that and see where that goes. Yeah.
I guess also I'm thinking about this type of knowledge. It's indigenous to all of us because we all have indigenous heritage way back. And it feels to me like it's becoming more and more at the fore. It's still kind of fringy. It's still kind of, you know, out there. There weren't that many people on this call. But more and more people are interested, and I'm sure, Linda, you can echo what I'll say, is that when I give talks on trees in this context, there's a few people who will come up and say, I talk to trees all the time. This tree said this, that. How many people that you just said were at the Co-Creative Spirituality Conference, either live or live streaming? And I mean, the hidden life of trees, for example, it's not exactly on this point of communicating, but it's acknowledging the intelligence of nature. And that's an international bestseller. So that's encouraging. You know, there is this push. People are waking up, and they want to be connected in this way. They want more of this kind of knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I was allowed to write this dissertation, because it was considered a sexy topic.
And yeah, and that it is in academia now, and the non-human turn, or has been going on. You know, I'm quoting Grusin here in his book, The Non-Human Turn, since the late decades of the last century. But actually, I'm thinking of a question now. So you use the more than human. Different people use different terms other than human, more than human. If I did I get that right? It's more than human for you, or other than human?
I think I was saying other than human, but it's not what I usually say. I just kind of said it this way for the talk because it seemed like the easiest thing to start with.
Can you talk about what your including non-human as a possibility as well?
Yeah, the non-human part, it doesn't feel good to me because it's basing everything in terms of humans. You're either human or you're non-human. So it's like a negation of human, and human is still the main thing. So that one didn't feel good. There's a writer who uses more than human, Frederique Apfel-Margolin. I used some of her work. I don't know if you've heard of her, but I think she uses it in a slightly different context, that they're beings that are enacted when humans and spirits are working together. So I'm not really sure. I didn't do a study of who uses which terms where at all. And I just sort of chose that for this presentation. In my dissertation, I don't use that at all. But what I do when I'm talking about the different ways that we can understand beings that are not physical is I use the term transphysical for beings. Again, it's slightly problematic because it seems to make the physical the cornerstone of everything, and then everything else is transphysical or beyond the physical or something. But you know, we are limited in our vocabularies a little bit at this point. So transphysical I used for any kind of beings like nature spirits that seem to still be enacted in some kind of a space-time matter, even if it's different than the one we're used to, like an etheric being, say, or a being in your dreams, a dream being, or a mental being. And I also ended up talking about devas as virtual beings. So this is the terminology that worked for the work I did, because when you think about wholes that include possibility and indeterminacy, which is the sort of ontological piece of the work that I did, we suddenly have this new category, because in our limiting framework, everything is real. Everything is pre-given discrete pieces of things. But when you're bringing in indeterminacy, think quantum physics here, or possibility, the beings at Findhorn, the devas, are beings that hold all the possibilities or patterns, according to these early Findhorn founders. And that really works with the fact that when you have a whole that includes possibility and indeterminacy, the devas, for me, are the beings that hold that as part of the whole. So it makes them sort of virtual beings. They're neither here nor there. They're sort of, as Karen Barad put in the language of agential realism, they're on the razor's edge of being non-being, right? Because they don't exist in space-time. So what does that mean? You know, as soon as we go beyond our limited mental container in which things exist in some kind of space-time format, there's some kind of subject object, something we can point to or engage with as separate beyond that. And you know, this is where the work of Sri Aurobindo, for example, becomes helpful. You enter into a place where you're not limited by the finite anymore. We're talking about infinite. The infinite comes into play, possibilities beyond space-time. I don't really have that much to say about it. I think that's a big edge for our way of thinking. But the devas are beings that really fit into that space. So I talked about them as virtual beings, and it's interesting to have this different sort of ontology of beings that you can start to, again, they're not the only two, but it's a way of working with different types of beings to point to the fact that, well, there really is a rich ecology going on here, and there's possibly different kinds of things we can do with different kinds of beings. I totally lost track of your question. Oh, the names, right. Yes, other than humans. So yeah, I don't have much more to say about that.
Yeah, you were totally on the question the whole time.
Okay, good. I think I'm getting a little bit tired.
Who was that person that you mentioned, not limited by the finite?
Oh, Karen Barad. Last name is B-A-R-A-D.
Sorry, I thought you said somebody else, but maybe that's because it broke up. But that's Karen Barad, okay.
Not limited by the finite. Yeah, this is the bringing in of quantum physics and coming up with a metaphysics that is supported by the findings, the most recent findings of quantum physics, in which things are entangled all beyond and through space and time. So it kind of opens up a lot of doors to exciting ways to work with it.
Was the other name Frederic or Frederica?
Ah, yes, yes. Frederic Apfel-Marglin. It's a hyphenated last name, APFFEL-MARGLIN. And her book, Subversive Spiritualities, which is anthropological in nature, I believe, she used Karen Barad's work to talk about how ritual could be real. And so I just found that another fascinating way to say, look, there's so many things that we're limited by, you know, these spirit beings can't exist. Ritual doesn't make any sense. It's, again, things that when we moved into these dualistic ways of thinking, all of those non-dualistic whole kind of phenomena well, they didn't go away, obviously, but they're not included anymore in our sense of reality. So then when you bring in these new, or not new again, because Indigenous authors have been writing in academically also about these ontologies. They're just, it's not necessarily pointed out. But when Western people come along and say, look, there's these new ontologies where it is possible to have rituals be efficacious, it is possible for these other types of beings to exist, then it's exciting, you know, as coming to it myself in that way and feeling super excited about it before realizing that, okay, this is already the worldview of other people, was, we all have to come to it through our own way. And there are definitely all valid ways of knowing.
It's like we have to remember it.
We have to remember
this way of knowing and being.
Yes, well, that's the other thing, right? It's coming into the academic literature. And it's probably also coming into other ways of knowing, I would hope, not just academic. But for me, it's that bridging of, okay, here's something we're writing about, but we can still keep it distance. Like my whole journey feels like that. It feels like having held the world and my own being at a distance, and then gradually coming to inhabit new parts of it. And that I'm still on that journey, and there's still a lot to learn, obviously. But at this point, I at least feel like I have something to share. And yeah, if there's anything I could do, it would be to encourage people to take the important analytical work they're doing and put it into some kind of embodied practice, which again, with, you know, with art, there's so many different ways of doing it. I'm watching my kids grow up and go to schools that just want to
Uh-oh. Did we lose Linda again? Linda, we might have lost you. No worries though. I'll just take this moment to remind everybody that next week at the same time, we've got David Borsos. Is that how you pronounce it, David?
Borsos, yes.
Perfect. Who will be presenting on the esoteric philosophy and psychology of Alice Bailey. And David, I was just curious while we wait for Linda to come back, if you had, hey, Linda.
Very interesting that I got kicked out right when I said I was feeling complete.
So I was just going to ask David if he might give us a little teaser of what we can expect next week. And while he's doing that, if anybody has any last questions for Linda, and if Linda, you were, I think, going to mention if there was one thing you'd want us to leave us with. So we'll wrap up. If David, do you have any things we can look forward to next week?
Well, my talk will be basically at first discussing Bailey's philosophy from cosmology down to subatomic particles and the Davidic beings, and then shift it into the human dimension and esoteric psychology and how the human being relates in her system. And I thought it's going to be a download of a lot of information and a lot of slides. And I thought, Matt, maybe you could, or I thought I'd break it up into 3 or 4 sections, and then after each section, open it up for questions. Instead of going through a whole hour, because
Sure.
It's a lot.
No problem. Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
And finish up with the ethical component and discussing the forces that are hindering the new ideas that are coming forward.
Sounds great. Thank you. Awesome. Well, come back for that, everybody. Vince, Kia, Sarah, David, are there any last questions you have for Linda?
A lot of gratitude. I'm super excited to meet you and also to connect with PCC.
Thank you. Vince, I saw you were about to say something.
Yeah, I just want to likewise, yeah, just thank you for putting this on. It's been really informative, and I brought up a lot of ideas for my own dissertation coming up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Linda, is there any last things you'd like to leave us with?
I'm not sure when I cut out, but I think the last thing I was saying, which is a fine note to end on, and you may all be doing this already, so I'm just kind of sending it out there to the wider world, I suppose, is this hope that with all the different types of work we do, that we do whatever we can to follow it through in an embodied action. That maybe one of the current underlying issues of these different crises is this detached analytical mode of being in the world, and that we can find this way to get a felt sense of our interconnectedness and act that way too. So thank you all so much for letting me share this work with you. It was really fun, and it worked. I got to be friends with the camera and talk to the camera instead of to a room full of live people. So thank you so much for being here and giving me this experience.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you. I'm gonna stay on and read the chats, because there were a couple chats I didn't fully read through, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording and
Okay.
thank you all for being here. Sarah, David, Vince, Kia, and all the rest who came by, and everybody who watches after.
Thank you for your wonderful moderating. I really appreciated you being there.
And you can find us at pccforum.wordpress.com, and we'll see you around.
Okay.